From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, my name's Peter Kelly and I'm your host with Kate Field. Hi Kate, how are you?
I'm all right, yeah. It seems like ages since we've had a chat. We've both been very busy and trotting around the globe, which sounds very, very glamorous, but it never is. Or certainly not in my case for work.
No, I mean, it wasn't glamorous going to Australia. It was hard work. It was very cold actually. I had to buy a jacket when I got out there. Much to the hilarity of all my Australian mates, they said, you forgot what it's like to have winter in Australia on the East Coast. So yeah, that was pretty intense.
Yeah, that's no fun going to Australia and then finding out it's cold and wet.
But I am actually living out the principles of health and well-being. I'm going to Greece on Wednesday for a short break. So yeah, bit of Greek wine and beaches. So yeah, looking forward to it. Awesome. So are you going anywhere?
No, not booked yet, but very interestingly, this morning over coffee with my partner, we were talking about it, and we were talking about going to Greece. So, because my partner's never been, so yeah, we might swap notes later once we've made a decision.
Oh wait, I'm going to Lefkada. It's attached by a bridge from the land, so it's quite close to the mainland. So it's stunning, very nice.
I'll take that recommendation on board.
Enough of us talking away as we do. Shall we introduce, or we'll let our guest introduce herself to us? Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I was just sort of getting into Greece mode there and imagining myself on the med there. So I'm Sarah Gashier. I'm a workplace wellbeing consultant, founder of SG Wellbeing and Inclusify. I've been working in workplace wellbeing for just over 5 years, and now I'm focusing on compassion in the workplace and revolutionizing the workplace to make it more inclusive for individuals with long-term conditions, as well as continuing to work with clients on health and well-being in the workplace.
Okay, keeping yourself busy.
Yeah, indeed. And I also forgot to mention the psych safety stuff. So also recently certified as a psychological safety practitioner, which I'm sure we'll delve into later. But yeah, embedding the leadership and culture and psychological safety side of stuff as well.
Okay, well, we'll let you on that. We'll let you on here. We're all about psych health and safety, but we do psych safety we do psych safety as well, don't we, Kate? So, Sarah, you have an interesting past, don't you? Do you want to tell the listeners what you were doing in London a few years ago?
Yeah, of course, Peter. When he said interesting past, I was like, well, what are you referring to, Peter? We've talked about a lot of interesting stuff that I've done. So I led on the London Healthy Workplace Award a few years ago in London, in Westminster. And this was a evidence-based health and wellbeing award, which is no longer running, but I still use the guidance. I've had permission from the powers that be to still use this guidance. I still use it with clients today. So this was benchmarked against industry standards. And it was evidence-based from public health professionals and organizational psychologists, and it's basically a holistic award that looks at all things that impact mental health and well-being in the workplace, everything from corporate support, leadership, health and safety, and most recently, I say recent, it was a couple of years ago when they refreshed the award, equality and inclusion and mental health risks in the workplace. And they also looked at remote working. And then also there's a big chunk on mental health, and then physical health and physical activity, nutrition, healthy eating, substance misuse. So it's really a holistic approach at looking at well-being.
So Sarah, I mean, over the years that you were doing the awards, and it's interesting because me and Kate talk about this quite a lot. There's been a range of awards that have come about over the last say seven or so years. And a lot of the times you're getting similar winners for most things. Also, a lot of large organisations tend to win these awards. I'd just be interested from you because actually, I think there's some brilliant examples in small and medium enterprises. Some stuff that we personally have come across. Do you see that? Did you see that yourself? Did you see there was a lack of SMEs actually getting involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's perfect timing for me to lose my voice there. Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And actually, I think that the Mayor of London had noticed that about the size of organisations that were being accredited with the London Healthy Workplace Award. And so he'd put the micro award in place. And so this was for organisations that were under 10. And I'd accredited a number of organizations that had under 10 in their organization. So the micro award, it had some differences in place that, you would imagine might be a bit more challenging. So if we look at sort of the accreditation, there might be some things around some certain policies or the way they do consultations. So it was tweaked a little bit to make it a bit more suitable for SMEs or for micro organizations to make sure that they could still take part.
You find people actually did take part and were committed to it, or was it a slow build up?
Yeah, no, absolutely they did. I worked with an architecture firm, some schools, some charities. There was definitely people that were interested in doing that. Obviously, in a really obvious way, they don't have the resource, right? They don't have the engagement teams or the well-being teams or all of these people or a specific person. I remember one of the charities I worked with, it was the founder, the CEO, who was doing everything. But I mean, in micro organizations, the CEO does tend to be wearing all the hats and doing everything. So yeah, they were keen. I just think they have a bit of a less resource than larger organizations. I think sometimes, as you're aware, in smaller organizations, there is a better culture sometimes. So it's, in a way, a bit easier to even make some changes when you have a smaller organization, maybe of like less than 200 or around 10. It's when you get the larger organizations that making those changes becomes a bit more challenging.
Was it helpful having the mayor there for his sign off? I mean, it's for those who are non-UK listeners, the mayor's he's quite a senior politician within the City of London. Well, he or she would call themselves the top person. But so, uh, did he become aware? Did you make him aware? How did the mayor suddenly go? I'm going to do a micro award.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having his sign off, I mean, the award has stopped now, but having that, it was really important actually for the businesses that took place because they would see it as a badge of honor, they have the London's, the Mayor of London's London Healthy Workplace Award. When they were accredited, it would get signed off by him when they had their certificate. So, yeah, of course, it was quite important. He did have a say in a lot of the stuff. I mean, on the presentations and on the award itself, it would be teams working for the Greater London Authority that work with the mayor. But it definitely had a say in how it went, and they appreciated that. There was, as I think most people do. I think even with one of the key things of the award is having the first thing in the award actually is, do you have senior management support? Do you have sign off from your chief exec or HR director to do things around mental health and well-being? So I think it's always appreciated when the person at the top, so to speak, is sponsoring mental health and well-being.
This is music to our ears, isn't it, Kate?
It is, yeah. I mean, very, very much so. I think it's good. I'm having internet problems, which is always good fun. So I don't know whether you answered this question, but I'm curious to understand whether you saw a difference in terms of the quality of the entrance from when it first started to kind of the last time you ran it. Sort of the quality of the entries, but also I suppose the range of health and well-being services that were being offered?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess because there was iterations to the award since it first started out to, the most updated version we had in 2021. And then of course, because organizations can go up to do achievement and excellence. But the caveat to that, I think, is at the end of the day, I always see it as it is benchmark of industry standards and it is evidence-based, but it is like a starting point. So, we do ask for evidence. So going back to Peter, what you said earlier about, well, how does it fare out to other awards and that's going on that may not be evidence-based? We do ask to see evidence. We do ask to see policies, and we reviewed that, the consultants that were working on the award. But the caveat to that, I think, is that actually, and having worked in an organization was taken to legal proceedings for disability discrimination, but was previously awarded, I think you can do it, but then the day-to-day behaviors, the leaders are accountable for that. So, I mean, they can get the award, but whether they're living their values and behaving in a way that they are saying, on the award is something different, right? But we can go in and we can make sure that they have that foundation, they have the baseline, they know what they should be doing, they know what their policy should look like. But whether they live that out day to day is, but that's the whole point. I mean, even with the psych safety stuff, when I go and do a reassessment, or even with the London Healthy Workplace Award, we would go back and look if they would achieve, achievement or excellence. And with all of these things, you do have to go back and see if it is happening, because they might say they're doing it, but then what's happening day to day, the organization has to see that for themselves, I guess. And that's the challenge sometimes.
Yeah, welcome to the joy of the inspection role. Oh, so you have it. Let me see then. Yeah, and could they progress? So they got one level at 1 year, and you then reassessed, and could they then progress up, or it wasn't just a once in one time award?
Yeah, exactly. So there was another award. There was micro and communal, but then for most organizations, there would be foundation, achievement, and excellence. And as you would imagine, as they go through the stages, it would be more challenging. There would be different criteria and different ways. It is an audit, and the way the achievement and excellence was done was very different to the foundation. So it often takes a bit longer, and there's more. There's significantly a lot more pieces of evidence that they'd have to show. So yeah, they can progress.
Yeah, in essence, what we do sometimes come across is, "Oh, that's it. I've done it. I'm an incredible company now. I don't need to do anything."
And that's what I was saying earlier. I was in a workplace that had been accredited, and I remember speaking to the people at Affinity at work about this and saying, well, look, you shouldn't have accredited them, like all this has happened. And the thing is, though, you don't get that on paper when they are filling out, or where the accreditor is working with the organization to say, they don't say that we have bullying or discrimination going on. They don't. So it is smoke and mirrors sometimes. But the way I use it now when I work with clients is just a starting point. As well, this was because the criteria is amazing. A lot of hard work went into the criteria, but I think, as I said, I just use it as a baseline. But I work with the client, for a longer period of time to make sure change is happening and everything is going on, and we are making sure that all those things aren't taking place of the case study that I just told you about a moment ago. Because it's just so easy to have, even if we go back to the psych safety stuff for a second, the issue is with that is that you could have a team where there is high psychological safety, and then another team in the same organization where there isn't. And that's it. And that pockets of toxicity is the issue we have. So yeah, that organization I was in might have been doing a lot of great stuff, tokenistically, if I may say, that was achieving well-being and EDI, etc. But because there was issues of, pockets of toxicity, it will be perceived with cynicism and smoke and mirrors, really, that they're not doing what they should have been doing.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So quite a journey then from being a nutritionist into health and wellbeing and then into psych health and safety. I wonder if you can share how you sort of ended up on that journey.
Yeah, of course. So this journey, I think it's quite interconnected. Starting off in nutrition and public health. Nutrition is quite linked to our mental health. So what we eat impacts our mental health, and our mental health tends to impact our diet as well. And stress can impact the foods that we eat. When I was working in public health quite a few years back, before I'd started in workplace wellbeing, I'd experienced work-related stress and burnout. And I think this is what, the implication of that is I think it led to my autoimmune condition that I have, the kidney condition that I have. And so that led to me wanting to change the workplace. I'd started to see through this lens, how could the workplace be a bit different? And then it was quite serendipitous that the role in London Healthy Workplace Award came about. Perfect timing. And so I guess the rest is history. Now, the psych safety stuff was when, unfortunately, I'd experienced discrimination at work due to my disabilities, being neurodivergent and having kidney failure. I was in a workplace that lacked psychological safety. I challenged the status quo, and I was reprimanded for that. I was managed out of my job for having a disability. Wasn't a safe place to be able to speak up at all. And so that is kind of what inspired me to pursue the psychological safety certification. I started to focus more on creating cultures where individuals can thrive. And so that's why I looked at psychological safety, because I saw that as the foundation of having a healthy workplace, and building inclusion and building psychosocial risk and mental health and well-being all comes from actually, do we have that safe space in our team where we can challenge and where we can be open? So that's where we are today. And then experiencing that discrimination really made me think, well, actually, EDI needs to change. It needs to change massively, and we need to start looking at disability and chronic conditions and long-term conditions, because it's not being addressed properly at the moment.
So we're going for the other issues that are potentially easier to amend or to put in policies, but so I mean, EDI is around as other areas have come and gone. I think it's I'm wondering, do you feel it's here to stay, the equality, and inclusion, or do you think there's something else on the horizon?
Oh, what a great question. I think it is here to stay, because the Equality Act isn't going anywhere, but I think it is here to stay, but organizations need to just take a different approach from the traditional approach to EDI. And when I say traditional approach, it tends to be your sort of, awareness and, training. And let's do, if I look at race, let's do sort of our cultural heritage months. Let's do something for South Asian heritage or for Eid, but then we're not actually looking at the more systemic issues that's going on in the workplace. So I think it is here to stay, but we, because if we say, well, let's just scrap EDI altogether, it's screaming employment tribunal, really. So I think it needs to stay, whichever way you look at it, or you're trying to address it, whether it's under fancy new name, whether it's CSR, ESG, however you want to sort of, at the end of the day, it is about caring for your people, and the fact that it's actually the moral right thing to do, but it does actually improve performance and productivity and yeah, you end up making more money, so it makes business sense. And there's so much out there. I wouldn't want to go on about it now about the business case of being an inclusive employer. So yeah.
But inclusivity is part of that psych health and safety journey, isn't it? Psych health and safety is about those elements of work where people are being directly impacted, which are psychological and social. Can't think of anything more than when you obviously are subject to bullying or you're subject to harassment. The reason we've seen ESG, we've seen diversity, equality. No, it's not. Is it diversity, equality, inclusion, or is it which one? Let me get it right. Diversity, equality. Yeah, that's right. So we've seen various different things come along. I'm waiting for the time when we get, a full psych health and safety sort of enacronym about looking after people's workplaces and improving people's workplaces so that they can go home as they were and hopefully healthier. Which really brings me, kind of coming back to your own experience. Have you had an employer who'd had a different response to you in your situation? Do you think you'd still be there, or was this part of your journey that led you to becoming like a specialist and a consultant in this area?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think there are some, for me, it builds resilience and learning, right? But I mean, that's not to say that I would have liked this not to happen. It wasn't a pleasant experience at all, but I mean, I am using it as a transformative and in a positive way to change cultures out there and to change workplaces. So I am, using it as a positive, but it was definitely, yeah, a very unpleasant experience. And what I've seen from the research, Peter, is quite interesting, is that, my case isn't unique. There are so many people out there with long-term conditions that are experiencing something similar. So people with mental health conditions, neurodiversity, it's all these invisible conditions that, particularly the ones that fluctuate. We have like PMDD, stoma bags, MSK, and there's just so much out there. And there was some great work that I must mention by Jen Remnon that was done where she interviewed individuals with invisible disabilities, and she interviewed people working in strategy and in HR. And it was so concerning what came out from that there was just all the policies in workplaces in place are there to be used against employees with long-term conditions. So people in HR were asked, what policies do you have in place to support individuals with long-term conditions? And they couldn't think of any. They said, well, we use sickness, absence, and capability. Immediately, that says to me that you're being pushed out and you're not being supported. What about like retention policies or promotion policies? People with disabilities are not written into them. So, what I'd say is, well, actually, I wouldn't encourage anyone to disclose their disability. And that is why I think we need work like Inclusify and things like that, because when you're at that stage where you're recommending for people, don't disclose your disability because this is what happens, you don't get the adjustments. But what would happen if you did? It is sometimes better to mask. So yeah, it's not a unique case, unfortunately.
No, I mean, when I started my journey into psychology, and I wasn't, as you're aware, I'm dyslexic. I wasn't able to write very well. Didn't know what dyslexia was actually, but I remember getting the diagnosis of dyslexia in my second year of my degree, having also done an access course because I had no qualifications. And I remember my first job as an assistant psychologist, and I didn't share I was dyslexic. And in fact, I felt, well, and there I was as a psychologist, not openly sharing about it. And actually, had I shared about it, my experience as a clinical psychologist in those early stages could have been very different. It wasn't I didn't feel psychologically unsafe to do it because we were working in the psychology department. I just somehow felt I couldn't, that it would be detrimental to my career to say I couldn't do something. Whereas in fact, I've got other skills, and you'll understand this yourself. I may not be able to write very well, but I can talk. Well, probably talk too much, but perfect for a podcast, though, I guess. Yeah, perfect for a podcast. But in fact, what I do when I do write. I write small reports with the level of information that's there that people want. And ironically, people don't always want 50 pages. Sometimes they want, 5 to 10 pages. Tell me what the issue is, what the problem is, and what's the solution. So, but yeah, for somebody who's had to spend the last 25 years with that, oh God, it's longer than that, isn't it? Oh, nearly
You're showing
35
your
years.
age, Peter.
35 years where and I'll tell people anytime that I have these conditions, but it's interesting, your own, that people don't share, we don't talk about it, we don't I think some of the advantages psychologically in terms of how we support people's psychological health and safety is recognizing that not everyone functions and does things in the same way, and we have to.
I'll tell you my experience with that. So that in that organization, so I'll just like mention to you a couple of things I'll share from my story that I'd experienced, but I'll start off with the spelling one, just because we've been talking about that. So it was quite a humiliating experience, actually. So my manager had said, so I made a spelling mistake, a grammar mistake. And what she'd done was she'd emailed everyone in the team and the head of department, and she'd highlighted my spelling mistake. And she'd said, um, you know, when you, I'm just trying to think about this so I don't give it away too much, because of the proceedings that I mentioned. But so basically what they'd done was they'd said, well, if you email anybody, we want to be copied into it. Right. And that was so humiliating. And imagine it doesn't actually solve the issue of the spelling mistake. So so here, if we just put it in and say, well, what should have happened? Instead of putting an adjustment in place to support me with the spelling, like some sort of text software, Dragon, to read my emails out and check them, she said, well, I want to be copied into them. That doesn't actually stop the mistake from happening, but it just makes the employee feel humiliated. Again, going back to that psychosocial risk. So that is just one example. And then one of the other things that I do mention, and I want as many audiences to hear about, is I was asked, when will you get better from my kidney condition? And so they're asking me, when will I get better, as if I'm sort of the expert of this condition. And then what a sort of insensitive question to ask someone, when will they get better, when they have I don't want to use the word terminal just because it sounds so negative, but it's a lifelong condition. I'm not going to, and just my only regret was not answering it at the time, when you give me your kidney. Yeah, I would have definitely been pushed out of the job like immediately. But yeah, so I mean, it's just that those sort of things, and people ask me, well, how were you discriminated? What was said? What happened? I mean, just even something like that, really. Imagine someone being diagnosed with a condition, having to be on life-saving treatment 3 evenings a week of their life for the foreseeable. If you do want to donate a kidney, there will be a number below. But imagine that, and then facing something like that, rather than something on the opposite side of the spectrum where you're being supported, you're being harassed so much. So I mean, that's just a couple of examples of unfortunately what I'd experienced.
And discrimination, as you say, comes in very different forms, but we can see quite clearly it impacts your psychological health and safety, impacts your psychological safety. And I think that's a really interesting part of this podcast. It's realizing that, people who have long-term health conditions or lifelong disabilities sometimes face these additional hassles and these additional problems that are in the organizations that they work with, or even in general conversations with people. Well, you seem all right, in that kind of statement, which is sort of you hear. And actually I've met some incredibly gifted people who have dyslexia, who have ADHD, and and just get on and are really creative. And I just think I think that's an important message that we have to sort of continue to break down this stigmas that attach with um, these things that you're on. Um, yeah.
That's a great thing that you mentioned about the psychological injury. So, again, that is another thing that we're seeing increasingly in employment tribunals, and it can be something in terms of, the Equality Act or something taken towards employment tribunal. If if someone has a physical condition, you do end up with anxiety and depression, which is a form of disability. If you've experienced something for more than 12 months and it affects your day-to-day life, it counts as a disability. But yeah, you do end up with psychological injury from these impacts, from these experiences. And I was told by a researcher about a bit of research on um, people who undergo employment tribunals, they actually end up with PTSD. So there is definitely a massive psychosocial risk for experiencing something like this. So you do end up with, even if you do have, people forget, if you do have a physical condition, if you then add to that the experience or challenge of facing something like this at work, you're more likely to suffer from stress and then anxiety and depression. Um, and as well, when I talk about compassion, like you may have the suffering of your physical condition, and then add to that the suffering from, experiencing harassment or bullying at work. And it's like a recipe for disaster. Instead of actually receiving someone taking action to be compassionate towards you, it actually makes the situation much worse.
I mean, we're coming towards the end of our time here. How do you think the experiences that you've gone through, certainly over the last few years, have reframed how you do well-being, how you look at psychological health and safety? How's it? Um, what would you say some of the lessons are that you've learned? So, if you could leave our listeners with a couple of lessons from your own experience, what would you want them to be, and what would you say they are?
Oh, yeah, brilliant question. Yeah, I'll have to think about that one. I think what I would say is my experiences have definitely, like my personal experiences, have definitely taught me we need to sort of rethink the way that we look at mental health and well-being and inclusion, diversity, and equality. It has, I think the other thing is that we also need to look more on like leadership and culture and look more at that, and maybe like start from that, and from psychological safety. So again, I think the lesson I would say I'd want to leave the listeners with is to really address psychosocial risk. We need to start with having psychological safety as the foundation, make people feel included, and then make sure that all those hazards are being addressed and being looked at. We're looking at workload, we're looking at bullying, and we're looking at relationships and conflict. But first of all, we need to start with a place where people feel like they can be open, because there's no point doing social, risk. There's no point looking at that if people are too scared to mention that their workload is high or that they're being bullied. So start with that, and then yeah, we move forward from there.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Well, for those of our listeners that are on for YouTube, is it YouTube? That's what I couldn't remember to say before. Yes. You'll notice that Kate's connection dropped away, so please don't worry. I've received a text from her. She's got some signal problems, but so if you're wondering where she went, she's unfortunately that happened today. But it's been a wonderful opportunity to chat to you and to hear about your story and to hear some of your fascinating insights, particularly your work with the Healthy London Awards, and how you went back, you assessed, you evaluated, you made sure that people were improving and continual improvement, and that the evidence base was there, and then your own personal experience and what you've learned from that, and how that influences well-being. So all it leaves me to say is to thank you for being on the podcast, and to tell our listeners you can hear this podcast on the different podcast options that you have, and also you can see us on YouTube, and we'll say goodbye for now.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.